Hi, I'm Debbie Pace, author of Journal to Freedom, host of the Show Up Show podcast, and a 30-year broadcasting and journalism veteran. Today, we're going to talk about language from love. I'm so passionate about this topic because I'm also a mom with nearly 14 years of experience, and I coach clients every day on how to talk to their children and other loved ones in a way that empowers them versus breaks them down. This is such a critical topic because as parents, we may not realize the long-term impact our words and phrases have on our children that can then cause a need to repair them in the future. So today, we're going to cover words that block success and can shut down communication and solutions. We're also going to talk about empowering words and phrases that you can use that create opportunity and an open conversation. We'll talk about how to create an abundant mindset in your child using certain language. We'll talk about what to do when you just don't know what to say to your child. And we'll also drop in some extra tools and tips to set up your child for future success. So let's jump into it. First, I would love to talk to you about words. Words are the foundation blocks of our sentences and the basis of our communication. And we think a lot about the words that our kids use, but we might not think a lot about the words that we're using with them. And I always like to start out with something that I might have just dropped right there. It's the word always. On paper, it might seem like it's a very positive word. Always. You could always do something, right? It's open, but always actually solidifies something as a fact, something as an absolute. So when we look at always, think about some of the situations that come up for you where you might actually communicate to your child that they are a certain way and there's no other way around it. It's just who they are. For example, if you have a teenager, you might say, "You're always on your computer." Or you might say to them, "Well, you're always ignoring me when I try to talk to you." Or, "Why do we always have to go through this?" Or, "It's always this way." And so what we're doing is we're basically stating a fact and we're not giving them any opportunity to be different, do differently, feel differently, any of that. So we're really solidifying that this is an absolute fact. The next word I really like to look at is the word can't. We all know that can't isn't a good word, especially when our children use it. How many of you actually allow your children to even say the word? We don't allow it in my house, right? But what we might not realize is that we're using that word way more than our kids are. Think about a scenario, and most often in my family, it occurs shopping, where my child asks me for something and I say, "Oh, I can't," or "No, we can't," or "No, we can't." And whatever you follow that with is really solidifying a pattern for them in the future. I'm not going to get too far into that, but I first really want to look at the word can't. We use it and we say something like, "We can't," or "I can't, it's not really in the budget right now," or "No, we can't. Oh, I have nowhere to put it," or "No, I can't. I have to, check with somebody first," or whatever, right? We're always giving them reasons why things can't. Or, "Mommy, can you play with me right now?" You're like, "Oh, I can't. I have to do laundry," or, "Oh, I can't. I have to go to this meeting," or, "Oh, I can't. I have to do this video," right? So there's lots of scenarios that come up where we don't realize we're showing our children how they can't do things because we're showing them that we can't do them. So it really takes the power off of you and you're putting power in something else. So it's time we take that power back. The next word is challenging. The word challenging really implies a consistent and continuous struggle. So when we use the word challenging, we're kind of enforcing more of a challenge to come. So what we need to start looking at is how we can use different words. And I'll get to that in a minute. Here's a word that you might have heard of, and maybe you don't even allow it in your household. It's a 4-letter word, a really, really bad 4-letter word, and it's called hate. Hate is such a strong word. And when we use it in scenarios, we are absolutely putting negative energy into a situation, a person, a thing, anything. We are just bringing a negative vibe to the situation. I don't think we need to talk much about hate because I believe it's a universally negative word that most people think about. But just when you're going about your day, start to look for how you might be bringing these words up in communication with your children, or even communication with a significant other, or on the phone, or in a business meeting where maybe your children can actually hear you talking and they're picking up things without even knowing it. So it's really important that we be aware of the words that we're using. Another phrase is have to. Have to is such a strong word that limits us and sort of keeps us in a victim mentality because we're saying, I have to, most likely because I feel like I don't have a choice. So when we say, for example, going back to the situation where, mommy, can you play with me? You say, well, I can't, I have to do this. So what you're doing is you're showing your child that all these other things that are seemingly out of your control are preventing you from being the parent that they really are seeking. So take a look at where you're actually not owning your own power in your world and using words like have to and challenging. So another word or words is need to. Okay, this is the same as have to, but it's just obviously a different word. When you say I need to, what you're saying is there are other priorities that are coming first. And whatever's going on in my life, I need to tend to these first before I can be the parent that I really want to be to you or that you really want me to be. And it does put us in less of an ownership place for our own life. And remember, all of these might not be bad specifically toward your children, but they're learning from you how to go and behave in the world. So if you have to or need to do certain things, you're teaching them to build that type of life for themselves. Remember, we're the biggest role model for our kids. So the next word I really want to take a look at is never. It's sort of like always, only it's never. And it's in the same category. You're saying it's an either or. It's always or never, right? So if it's never, there is zero possibility that it could ever happen. You put the N in front of ever and it's never. You are removing any other possibility that something like that could happen because it's a never. Like, how come you never listen to me when I talk to you? Or I would never do something like that to you, right? Or I would never say the things to you that you say. Or here's one that I've actually even used with my own children and had to catch myself on. I would never talk to someone the way that you talk to me, which is probably not true, right? I'm guessing that if we say that to our children, most likely there's a chance that we've said that to someone else because they model our behavior. So another word is should. Oh my goodness. Have you heard the term yet? You're shoulding all over yourself. Well, there's a reason why that's a term. When you use the word should, what you're saying is, I wish I could, but I'm powerless to do it. So should is a really powerful word because what we're saying is, I have these expectations and they're not really being met. And I wish they were, but they're out of my control. Or we're also saying something like, as far as should goes, we're also saying something like, well, I would if I could, but clearly I can't. Can't is another one of our favorite words. So we're going to just add these to the list. I hope you're catching it. So far, let's recap, okay? So here's what we have. We have always, can't, challenging, hate, have to, need to, never, should, and my favorite, try. Try. As yoga says, there is no try. There is only do or do not. So what we do is when we use the word try, we give ourselves this out, oh, well, I tried. We're saying I don't really need to be accountable for my results because I tried. It implies a lack of ownership in our outcome. Now, look, here's the thing. As parents, we know we can affect the outcome, but we really can't control it. But this is a little bit different. This is saying, I don't fully believe that it's going to happen, so I'll just try. Big difference between it's going to happen and then afterwards we say, you know what? I gave it an honest try. It just didn't work out. But when you're going into a situation and you're using words like try, you're saying you don't really have to. So for example, as a parent, if your child says, mommy, will you play with me or will you do this with me? And you'll say, I don't know, I'll try. Another good example would be, hey, can we go to the theme park this weekend? You're like, I don't know, we can try. Our kids aren't going to believe us. They've already decided at that point, well, we're going to try. We're probably not happening. I'm just going to lower my expectations, feel a little bit of disappointment. I'm going to go in my room and play on my computer where I always am, right? Do you see how this happens? We create this scenario of negative words and it creates a negative energy. And then we live in this negative environment and we wonder why a lot of people aren't laughing in the scenario. And we wonder why there's just this something that's hanging over our heads. So recapping some of the negative words that we should really stay away from, they include always, can't, challenging, hate, have to, need to, never, should, and try. Now that we've discussed the words that block success and can shut down communication options and solutions, we're going to dive into empowering words and phrases that you can use to create opportunity and an open conversation. So now that we have the negative words down, we're going to take a look at positive words that we can actually use instead. So if we go back to the first set of words, the ones that block success and can shut down communication and solutions, we now have empowering words and phrases you can use that will create opportunity and an open conversation. So looking at the word always, the counter to use instead would be sometimes, because sometimes opens the door for possibility. It's not black or white, it's more gray. So sometimes means there are times that perhaps you act out and I don't really care for it. But also there could be times where I'm extremely proud of you and you're an amazing person. And I want you to know that I recognize those times too. I don't only see you as someone who doesn't listen or is always ignoring me or is always on their computer. I see you as a well-rounded child and I'm excited to show you how much I love you and how proud I am of you. So the next one is, we looked at can't. And now we're going to look at words like choose to or I'm not sure how yet. So instead of can't, we want to open the possibility to there actually could be other options besides a straight up I can't. So we're going to look at choose not to, I'm not sure how yet. So looking at this from let's look at homework. So I still have a lot of times where my kids come to me wanting help with homework. And one of the big things they say is, I can't figure this out. I don't know how to do this. I can't. What I always like to rephrase them with is, I'm not sure how yet. Or I say, you just don't know how yet. So instead of can't, in our very own language as parents, we can change the words we use as well. Instead of, well, I can't buy that because I don't have the money. You can use words like, actually, we can afford that, but I'm choosing not to because of XYZ. Maybe it's you want to teach them a valuable lesson about money, or maybe it's that you want to let them know that we have finite space and we don't want to clutter up our home. Whatever the reason, using words like choose not to, or I'm not sure how yet in relation to homework, or something that your child feels disempowered in, can actually start opening them up to there being a different outcome, especially with homework, which so many parents struggle with. The first two had sort of counter words, positives and negatives, but the last sets of words and phrases that I'm going to use really can stand on their own and don't need to be a counter to anything. It's really just an opportunity to start looking for more ways to use them in your life and on a daily basis. So they include things like prefer not to spend time on. So instead of I can't or don't know how or things like that, we can say things like, I prefer not to spend time on this. That is such a different way of looking at it than have to. So I'd really like to take a look at the entire list of empowering words with you. In addition to the first two that we just covered, being sometimes and choose not to or am not sure how yet, I really wanted to bring you a full list of empowering words and phrases that you can pull from anytime you find yourself in a situation with your child, or you find your child in a situation that you can kind of tell they're backed into a corner. So they include prefer not to spend time on. So instead of things like I have to or I can't yet because, start allowing them to take ownership in their own behavior and their own lives by doing the same in yours. And you can use words like prefer not to spend time on, which shows it's your choice. It brings the power right back front and center within you. Another one is I choose to or I desire. So What that means is, again, you're making choices. You're in full control of your life and in full control of your decisions and how you choose to show up in life. And you're going to empower them to do the same thing. Another one is seldom or rarely. So instead of never, which is such a shutting down word, it really is. Never is a word that really just gives your child no door out. So instead of using that, you can use words like seldom or rarely. So instead of you never ever listen to me, you can say stuff like, rarely do I feel like when I talk to you, you listen to me. Or, it seems like we rarely spend time together anymore. Why don't we start looking at ways that we can spend more time together and get to know each other? Or why don't we do things like go to a park or let's go shopping? That's another option too. So another phrase would be could or want to. So instead of have to or need to, you're taking a little bit more ownership here by saying, yeah, we could definitely do this instead of can't. Start looking at ways that you're actually starting to shut down and basically be a no man or a no woman before your child even finishes what they're asking you. Look at those places and see where you can insert words like could or want to, as opposed to have to, need to, should, those types of words. Another phrase is intend to or would like to. It's along the same lines as could or want to. All of these words, if you notice, they're much more opening words. They're much more empowering and positive words. They're more uplifting and leave you more open to possibility that something else could happen. They're not finite. So let's take a look at some of the phrases that we just learned. There's sometimes, choose not to, or am not sure how yet. There's am working through or see a growth opportunity. Prefer not to spend time on. Choose to. Desire. Seldom or rarely. Could or want to. And intend to or would like to. Don't those words feel so much more empowering than can't and should and have to and need to? So if you think about how you feel when you say or think about those words, it has the same effect on your child. So one of the ways, if you feel like your child is a little bit disempowered, or maybe they're just not really owning some responsibility in life, or maybe you feel like they've just kind of shut down a little bit to you, this is a great opportunity to start putting these things in action, and you'll see some pretty instant results in their behavior and in their scope of possibility for their own life and their own capabilities. Next, we're going to look at how to create a growth mindset in your child by using certain words and certain language. So one of the things that we find ourselves as parents saying to our kids is, you're so smart, or look how smart. We put so much emphasis on the word smart and not enough real emphasis on giving it their best effort, or this is where I use the word try, or how hard they worked on something. So when we focus on how smart they are, we're saying, I expect you to constantly achieve. And so when they don't perform at a certain level, then they start to beat themselves up and it becomes a very disempowering situation for them. So the way that we can empower them is, for example, when they bring home a test score that they're not happy with, instead of berating them, which by the way, they've already done such a good job of that from the moment they got the paper to the moment that they showed it to you, or that they got the grade to where they told you about it, that nothing you can say can really make them feel any worse about themselves. So this is best for us to really acknowledge the part of them that gave it their best effort and that is human. The best thing we can do for our kids when they have what they perceive as a failure, or they haven't achieved what they really wanted to do, is recognize their effort. So when we say things like, wow, I know you worked really hard on this, or I know this was important to you, so I know you gave it your best effort. I have no doubt. And besides, you're only human. I know you did the best that you could. Words like that really go so far with your child. So another thing that we do is when they do something and maybe they don't succeed that well at it, we're like, oh, it's okay. Maybe this isn't your sport. Have you ever said that to your child? Or maybe this just isn't where your passion is. So instead of saying something that says, well, this isn't you, For example, something that might actually shut them down to the possibility of having it in the future. So let's say they can't throw a baseball, and then you're saying, well, that's okay. Maybe baseball's just not your sport. They're going to put that in the back of their mind and probably will not intend to pick up the sport of baseball because they're going to believe that they're just not good at it and they're not cut out for it. So our words can be so impactful, and it's really important to say things instead like, hey, maybe we could try something else. There are so many sports. Maybe there's one that you'll love better. Maybe there's one that you'll actually excel at without having to work so hard at. Things like that, instead of really just putting the nail in the coffin and saying, that's okay, this isn't your sport. One of the other really important, empowering parts to talking with our children is allowing them to accept mistakes as a learning opportunity and not a failure. So, one of the ways that we can really do this and help our children is to be open and forthcoming about our own mistakes or our own learning lessons in life, where maybe a business deal didn't go the way we thought it would, or maybe we didn't do as well on a diet as we thought, or maybe we kind of flubbed up on our finances of doing this thing, or we forgot to file paperwork, or something that makes us human, that shows our child, A, it's okay to acknowledge that I make mistakes because everyone does, and my parents are my role models and they're showing me this, but also it allows them the opportunity to see it as a learning lesson and not as a failure. Because if we show them that anytime we don't succeed or meet the expectation, then it's a failure and there's something bad, they're going to seek to avoid that type of failure or life lesson at all costs. And then they will likely be missing an opportunity in life to really grow, stretch, and expand into their full capacity because they're going to go through life avoiding any type of mistake. So what they'll do less and less is take on things that are challenged or risky because they want to avoid mistakes at all costs. So it's our job as their parents to really teach them it's okay to take a big risk and not succeed and use it as a lesson, as opposed to stay in a really safe zone and never have succeeded and really risen to our full potential and capacity. And one of my very, very favorite experiences to teach my own children is that when stressful situations arise, or maybe they're getting really hard on themselves because maybe something didn't go the way that they had planned, it's really to pause and breathe. Breathing is so underrated in our society. When the stress level and the cortisone levels are rising in our brain and we're getting into that fight or flight and we're feeling really unhappy about a certain scenario or an event, or maybe there's something stressful coming up, what we can really do to help our children is learn coping mechanisms for when all this other stuff pops up and they're not necessarily pulling from the positive words or things aren't exactly going their way in life. We can teach them to take a moment and breathe. Just pause. So instead of instantly reacting, let's take a moment and lean into this a little bit and figure out where to go from here. Giving our children the opportunity to not have to instantly respond with the right answer or the right move allows them the flexibility to, first of all, start looking inside. Because when we pause and we take a kind of a step away from the outside, we intuitively turn inward at looking for our answers and our solutions and our next steps. So that is a really, really powerful way of not having to think about much except breathing. Remember, our kids are learning from us. So when they see us in stressful situations and we decide to pause and breathe, they're learning to also pause and breathe when they find themselves in stressful situations. Okay, so we have some pretty interesting options for working with our kids to teach them really an empowering mindset and really put them into a much more empowered state. One of the most important ones, though, is really learning to accept mistakes and what we would perceive as failures and use them instead as a life lesson and enable our kids to get more comfortable taking risks and being okay with not meeting the expectation, but still learning something from it and growing, because it's all about growth, isn't it? So now that we've talked about how to create an abundant mindset in your child using certain language, what do you do when you just don't know what to say to your child? Because how often do we find ourselves in situations where we know there's an opportunity to teach them something or to help them learn from something, but maybe it's a heated scenario, or maybe it's a really stressful workday, or maybe you have 12 things on your shoulders and you really don't just have the ability to deal with the situation at hand. The first thing you can do is breathe. Breathing, again, is so underrated in our society. When you pause and breathe, you get extra oxygen to your brain. You tell the fight or flight response in your body to just cool it, to slow down. You're taking back control of your responses, and you're leaning inward yourself, and you're tuning in to your own answers. When you really don't know what to say to your child in any given moment, think about when you were their age. What would you personally really want to hear? What would move you? What would make you feel better? Or what would help calm you down as a child their age? So whether they're having a temper tantrum, or they're sassing you, or they're frustrated or upset because they feel like you don't listen, or you're always busy, or they feel like they're a failure, or they feel like they always have to be perfect. In those moments, pause and breathe and think about, okay, how would I want to be treated? When I was their age, what did I feel? What did I think? And what would I have wanted to hear? And this is always where we can come from a place of love. That's why this is called language of love. One of the easiest ways to get into a loving response with your child is to think of yourself at their age. What kinds of things did you fear? What kinds of things were on your mind? What were the biggest problems in your world at that particular age? And then think about, how would you have told yourself in going back? Like, think about yourself. If your child is 10, 11, 12, think about yourself as a 10, 11, or 12-year-old. What are some of the things that you wish you would have known, or that you wish you could have moved through, or had extra tools for? Well, this is your opportunity, by the way, as you're talking and conversing and learning how to really communicate with your child in an empowering way. It's also your chance to go back and heal those particular parts of yourself so that you can show up to your child in a much more empowered way. And as a much more empowered adult, you're not bringing your own bags forward. And then the third thing that I would highly recommend, and what I recommend a lot of my clients do when trying to understand how to communicate with someone, is put your hand over your heart and think about how it feels to love that person. What does love look like when you think about them? No matter how upset, frustrated, or angry you might be at the time, put your hand on your heart and remember how it feels to love them. And no matter what you choose to do, whether you're able to identify with them at their particular age, if none of the other things worked, put your hand on your heart, breathe, because you can never lose when you breathe. In fact, you only lose when you don't. Put your hand on your heart and come from a place of love. And remember that this is your child, and you chose to have them here. And they are all the parts of you that are amazing. Even though at times they're also the parts of you that make you crazy, there's a lot to love about them. So come from that place. When you don't know what to say to your child, come from a place of love and just say something loving. Even if it's not the answer to the problem at hand, say something loving. What does love look like, sound like, and feel like? And start there. When you have no idea what to say to them, start there. There's a lot of information, and you can kind of get overwhelmed if you start Googling how to handle my child, how to deal with my child, how to talk to my child. But if you start taking some of these examples and looking at the language that you're using, whether it's empowering or disempowering, and if you can start to identify the areas in your own life where this is coming into play, because it all starts with us as the parents. Any change, any healing, any true remarkable transformation in our family has to begin with us. And it begins with us being conscious about how we're talking to ourselves. So anytime that you feel yourself responding to your child, pause for a moment. Think about what you're hearing. What is that self-talk that you hear? This is one of the tools I'm going to give you that I normally use with my own clients, but it's really a way to figure out what it is that you're saying to yourself, because that is the expectation and the language that you're putting out on your child. For example, I had this one client who had an extremely difficult and overbearing father. No matter what he did, he could never do the right thing. No matter what job he had, he was always being told that he was capable of so much more and he could do so much more. And his emotions were shut down. And so basically all he felt like he had to give in life was his achievements. And so when he wasn't achieving, or when things didn't meet his expectations, he would turn into his totally overbearing and unaccepting father. And that's how he would in turn talk to and treat his kids and his wife. When we were able to really dig deep and look at where this came from, which was his father, and it was his father's stories of him and not something that he would personally choose to think about himself, he was able to start unraveling that story. And each time he showed up with his family, when he was stressed at work or something wasn't going his way or his kids weren't meeting his expectation of what his kids were supposed to look like, and he would start hearing, oh, well, you must be a bad father, and just all this self-talk, he would start to really break down when he would hear those things. But over time, we were able to work through that. He was able to start hearing those and shutting them down before they became the language that he expressed with his family. So it's a process. And I would say, just like I say to my clients, have grace. Have a lot of grace with yourself, because this process doesn't happen overnight. You didn't learn them overnight, and you're not going to unlearn them or learn new behaviors overnight either. So have grace, the same type of grace that you're going to have with your children, that's going to change your language and turn it into one that is very loving and one that they start receiving you. And you can totally change the entire state of your relationship by the way that you show up and by the way that you start talking to your kids. So we had some great tools there. I hope that you found some that are really going to work for you and that you're excited to start to try. We looked at words that block success and can shut down communication and solutions. We also addressed some empowering words and phrases you can use instead that create opportunity and an open conversation between you and your child. We also looked at how to create an abundant mindset in your child using certain language, and how to remove certain expectations that they feel they have to have in order to perform and meet your approval. Then we looked at, what do you do when you just don't know what to say to your child? One of the most powerful tools that I can give you is to breathe. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Take a moment. Just because someone responds instantly doesn't mean you have to. In fact, you can take the power back when you decide to breathe and pause, and you come at it from a much more optimistic place. And then we gave you some extra tools and tips to set up your child for future success. And part of that is by looking at your own child and your own stories and really addressing where they came from, if they belong to you, and then start rewriting them so you can show up a little bit differently in life. So I hope that you found this extremely useful. I'm Debbie Pace, and I am so grateful that you took the time today to learn some of the language of love so that you can then empower your child to go and do the same in the world. Thank you.